I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. Lindsey Graham has filed an emergency application with the United States Supreme Court to try to block his testimony from the Fulton County Special Grand Jury in connection with Fani Willis's criminal investigation of election interference into the 2020 election. Lindsey Graham previously appealed a district court judge's ruling compelling him to testify. Lindsey Graham asserted that the speech and debate clause of the Constitution, which is supposed to immunize lawmakers from having to testify in connection with statements that they make on the House floor or Senate floor, or statements that they make in connection with their legitimate legislative functions. Lindsey Graham argued that his exhorting and cajoling, well, I'm putting it nicely, his extorting of Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, and telling Brad Raffensperger to overturn the results of the election and to find more votes. Lindsey Graham said that was all part of his legitimate legislative functions as being a senator from the state of South Carolina. The district court judge said, look, in terms of legitimate legislative activity, Lindsey Graham, you don't have to be asked those questions. The Fulton County Grand Jury can't ask you about if you were doing legitimate investigative work. But as it relates to your communications with Donald Trump's presidential campaign, that has nothing to do with your legitimate legislative function. So that's category one. Number two, there's a case called Gravel, which is a case that dealt with the speech and debate clause. It's a Supreme Court case. And in Gravel, it talked about types of conduct that was not legitimate legislative activity. And one of the categories there was exhorting and cajoling other like lawmakers from, to do things outside of your legitimate legislative activity. In other words, like unlawfully pressuring people to do illegal stuff, in other words, is how I would basically take away the legalese. And so Fulton County Grand Jury can ask you, Lindsey Graham, questions about if you were actually pressuring Brad Raffensperger to overturn the results of the election when he said it was a safe and secure election. If you were telling him, like Trump did, to find more votes, you can be asked those questions because that has nothing to do with your legitimate functions as a senator. And the third category is anything that you said publicly to the press you could be asked about, because those don't involve legislative activities that you would say on the House floor. So Lindsey Graham was like, I don't want to talk about those three categories. I'm Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which the district court judge who made that ruling that I just talked about was a district court judge in Georgia. The 11th Circuit is the court of appeals that oversees district court decisions in Georgia and elsewhere, in Florida, for example, as well. And the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, in a per curiam, unanimous, per curiam just means a unanimous decision, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the district court judge. And by the way, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is known for being a right-wing leaning court, but here you had a per curiam unanimous decision. And what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals said, you know what? The district court judge may have even went a little too far and took a very conservative, not conservative in the sense of like conservative liberal, but a very conservative reading of the speech and debate clause to even find that it may apply to fact-finding outside of a formal committee fact-finding investigation. But for the sake of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals analysis, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals said, we agree with the district court judge. So if you were engaged in that cajoling, exhorting, unlawful pressuring of lawmakers, unlawful pressuring of state officials like Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State. You should be asked about that. Your communications with the Trump campaign, you should be asked about that. And public statements, you should be asked about that. And Lindsey Graham, if you get asked a question that you think would impede on the speech and debate clause, raise the objection, and then you can go argue in front of the district court judge on a question-by-question basis if you believe that it would violate the speech and debate clause, but we think those categories are completely fair game for Fani Willis to ask you about. The January 6th insurrection was a big scar and stain in our nation's history. It was the first time where a peaceful transfer of power was attempted to be blocked by a previous president. The insurrection was a day that will live in infamy. We take this very seriously. The criminal charges around it. And Lindsey Graham, you need to answer questions. And Lindsey Graham then, as soon as he lost in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals this week, he swiftly filed this emergency application from the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit to the Supreme Court, asking that they stay and enjoin or stop him from having to testify until there can be an overall hearing, an overall granting of certiorari by the full Supreme Court on this issue over the speech and debate clause objection that Lindsey Graham is making. Lindsey Graham really doesn't want to testify here. And just think about it. Like, take away the legalese for a second. Don't worry, I'll bring the legalese back because I know you like it. I mean, this man is desperately trying not to testify. And just think for a minute, like, if you're the senator of South Carolina, what possibly could you be doing that is just so bad in connection with the Secretary of State of Georgia that you would be fighting so hard not to have to testify? Like, the reality is, there shouldn't even be any communications taking place. Why would a senator from South Carolina be talking to the Secretary of State of Georgia in a presidential election where the Secretary of State of Georgia said, Republican Secretary of State, mind you, who said this was the safest and most secure election in the history of the state. We're good here. Why are you even interfering in the first place? But yet alone, your entire testimony in the normal course, if you weren't aiding and abetting an insurrection, your testimony should just basically be like, well, I just called him. I said, hello. I said, what's going on? He said, that it's a safe election. It was all secure. And I said, great. Just wanted to check up. See you later. Thanks. The fact that that's not what took place, the fact that Lindsey Graham is so scared, but we know Lindsey Graham was intimately involved with the Trump campaign to try and do a coup, to try and overthrow our free and fair elections, to overthrow our democracy. Lindsey Graham sold his soul because he is a weak coward who clung on to McCain, not because Lindsey Graham was a reasonable guy, because he thought McCain was the power center at that time. And when McCain left, like that fish that sucks on to the shark, Lindsey Graham did it to Trump and tried to work with Trump to overthrow our democracy. That's why Lindsey Graham is desperately trying not to testify before this special grand jury. Just testify. For the party that's all, we're law and order, we're law and order. They sure hate to testify. And by the way, do you know who did testify over actually a frivolous and contrived investigation for 12 hours? You know who didn't plead the fifth and file hundreds of motions to try to avoid the testimony? You know who answered every single question despite how moronic and traitorous and stupid the questions were? Hillary Clinton. She sat in front of that stupid Benghazi investigation contrived by the precursor to the MAGA Republicans to try to torture and harass and just make her life miserable. She answered every question. No pleading the fifth, no I answered every question, sat there, answered every one of the ridiculous questions that she was asked. Yet MAGA Republicans, what does Donald Trump do? I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth with Letitia James. He's asked questions in the Letitia James Attorney General investigation about the valuations of his properties. You would think that as someone who brags and boasts about it, why wouldn't you answer those questions? What's the valuation of Trump Tower? What's the valuation of Mar-a-Lago? What's the valuation of Trump Soho? What's the valuation of Bedminster? You would think that he would answer the questions. What did you tell the lender it was valued at? I plead the fifth, 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 pleading the fifth, and each and every question that he was asked. Lindsey Graham, subpoenaed to testify, Attorney General, the District Attorney, Fani Willis, for Fulton County. Come in. We want to ask you a few questions about what happened. I mean, appealing all the way to the Supreme Court when the 11th Circuit ruled. So wild. But that's who the Republicans are, the cowards. Cowards. It's facts. That's just what the facts are. Just look at what the facts are. They're staring you right in the face. Here's one more legal point I want to make, though. So the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, when you make these emergency applications, the supervising judge, there's a different Supreme Court supervising judge who is the one who rules on these applications. Now, you know the 11th Circuit, based on all of the prior videos that we've done together on the Mar-a-Lago search warrant, that's also in the 11th Circuit, right? So when the 11th Circuit granted the Department of Justice's motion to stay and return the 100 classified records to the Department of Justice, the appeal that Donald Trump took, which was an application to vacate the order granting the motion for stay, returning the classified records, went to Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas directed, he's the supervising judge there. He could rule himself, or he can refer it to the entire court to rule. Even if he ruled himself, it's revisable by the entire court, so the entire court could come in and then overrule him. But the elements that you have to look at when you're making a emergency when you're reviewing an emergency petition like this, is you have to say, would the court, the overall Supreme Court, grant certiorari? Was this a type of case they would hear in in normal course, like the very small fraction of cases that they hear? Was the ruling by the Court of Appeals like very wrong? Was it like a very, very wrong decision? I'm simplifying it there. And then would the individual bringing the emergency application suffer irreparable harm? Those are the standards that have to be analyzed. Here, like the Mar-a-Lago search warrant emergency application, I don't think there's any merit to it. You never know with Clarence Thomas what he's going to rule, so you always have to put an asterisk. As an observer of the Supreme Court, I believe Clarence Thomas is going to do what I predicted he was going to do with respect to Donald Trump's application to vacate when Trump filed with the Supreme Court, which is to refer it to the full court. And then I think the full court is going to deny the relief being sought by Lindsey Graham. And I think Lindsey Graham is then going to have to testify. There's a quiet period right now in District Attorney Fulton County, Fani Willis's special grand jury proceedings while before the midterm elections. But as soon as the midterms end, Lindsey Graham, I predict, will testify. I will be forced to testify. I don't think Clarence Thomas is going to grant the emergency relief here. I think we'll find a very short order, but that's for another video. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, giving you the breaking news as it breaks. Oh, hit the subscribe button right now, please. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers. It's free to subscribe. So please hit subscribe now. I know you share these videos. Continue to share them. Hit subscribe. Also, if you want to grow this independent media network, here is what you need to do. Go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. There are a number of exclusive membership packages there. From lots of exclusive content, exclusive podcasts, exclusive behind the scenes stuff, Q&As with me and my brothers. Some packages you could even become an honorary producer of the podcast, then your name will appear, postcards from the brothers depending on the tier you join, and more. But most importantly, our competition is all funded by $1 billion and billionaires. We've got none of it. We rely on you. And so if you want to help support, no matter where you are, it would really go a long way to help. So please, if you can, help out. If not, just share the videos, but it would go a long way if you can help out. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs. It wasn't rigged, you're just a loser. At store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.